welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we're going to be running through all the key business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. So let's start the program though with a run through the markets here for you. So the biggest component of the NSE 20 over in Kenya, that's Safaricom, it seems to have found its floor pretty much at about 21 shillings and 30 cents. That's about 20 US cents equivalent, give or take. It was up 1.36% today. The benchmark NSE 20 though, that closed much lower, 10 points lower, 2769.78 was the relevant number. Bloomberg also reporting today that foreigners are leaving South African equities at a rate of about $72 million a day. Based on December JSE data, that's the fastest sell-off rate since 2016. Here's what's coming up tonight. Nigeria loses $2 billion. We're looking to the trade talks between China and the United States. Nigeria loses more than $2 billion of oil due to theft. And we'll also pay attention to a South African video game taking the world by storm. All right, then, so let's start tonight in Nigeria, specifically with the business of taxes. The Federal Inland Revenue Service says that it has collected more than $14 billion in taxes in 2018. That is the country's highest revenue collection in history. CGTN's Phil Ihaza has the details from Abuja.
According to the Inland Revenue Service Chairman, Tunde Fowler, the revenue collected last year exceeded the previous highest ever figure by more than $800 million. Fowler said revenue collection has been steadily increasing over the years, while the cost of collection has been reducing. He said it was down to initiatives like a new IT system that allows taxpayers to pay from anywhere in the world and also reduces costs. Breakdown of the tax generated showed that non-oil revenue collection stood at about $6.7 billion as against oil revenue collection of about $7.8 billion. The latest tax revenue increase showed progress in the government's efforts to diversify its economy away from oil, especially at a time when global crude oil prices struggled. The agency says it's hoping to generate about $22 billion for 2019, a figure that is slightly below the country's budget proposal for the same year at $24 billion. But analysts say the government needs to do more in maximizing the revenue generated from tax for the development of the country's infrastructure and provision of basic amenities for its nearly 200 million population. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, then let's move on to Southern Africa, specifically Zimbabwe. Despite a rather muted response from their members not to report work, teachers in Zimbabwe are still vowing to continue with the strike over there. They claim that crippling inflation in the country's economy has eroded their income, practically wiped it out, and that has made it unaffordable for them to even go to work. CGTN's Ramah Nyang spoke to some of the teachers. He filed this report.
Bright-eyed pupils begin a new school year filled with hope and anticipation, but not the case for their teachers who are battling to cope with an ongoing currency crisis. While most reported for duty for fear of disciplinary action, one teacher I spoke to simply couldn't.
I don't know the repercussions, but I want to go to school, but I'm incapacitated.
That's because her salary has been eroded by the rising cost of living.
School fees.
I need school fees for my children. They won't be allowed to study in school without me paying their fees. My landlord wants rent in US dollars, and I have nowhere to get US dollars. I earn 310 a month. Maybe you can help me budget it, because I have failed to find a way of budgeting it.
A meeting held Monday to try to address the challenges hit a stumbling block after government said it can't accommodate the teachers' pay demands.
It is unfortunate when government responds by saying that they have no capacity to raise the US dollars, because according to them, technically they are giving an explanation that 300 million is what is needed a month to offset the employment costs in this country. And 300 million, coincidentally, it is what is being raised through exports. So they are saying that situation is not tenable. It is not possible. But for us, that demand remains, because that is the best way going forward.
That sets the scene for a standoff that could adversely affect the education sector, because even if teachers show up for work, their level of performance may not be where it ought to be.
For those that we have reported to work, they are not there. They are there fiscal, but mentally, they are not there.
A state of mind that could remain until their needs have been fully addressed. Ramah Nyang, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's go back to Nigeria now. The country is estimated to have lost about $2.8 billion in revenues in 2018, and the bulk of that is due to oil-related crimes. That, at least, is according to a new report by the United Nations. Now, in 2018, between the 1st of January and the 23rd of November, 82 incidents of maritime crime and piracy were reported in the Gulf of Guinea. That's basically the waters in the Atlantic off the coastline of Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, among others. Oil production in the West African states started to recover in the first half of 2017, following a wave of militant attacks in the nation's onshore oil installations, particularly in the Niger Delta. Nonetheless, Nigeria's oil output did rise last year by about 9% in 2018 to just over 2 million barrels of crude a day. Let's get you a bit more details on this story. Deji Badmus is live in Lagos with more on this. So, Deji, according to the International Maritime Bureau, the bulk of reported incidents of piracy are now literally just concentrated in the Gulf of Guinea, the waters of Ghana and Nigeria and so on. Why hasn't the Nigerian Navy been able to decisively deal with this problem?
Well, Ramah, to be candid, I think the Nigerian Navy has done more than enough to deal with this situation. And it's actually one of the reasons why the agency responsible for maritime activities in this country, I'm talking about NIMASA, the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, continues to argue with the report of the International Maritime Bureau, saying that the reports are actually not reflective of the situation in the Gulf of Guinea, especially when you talk about Nigerian waters. Let me just refresh your mind, Ramah. Sometime last June, the Navy of this country and the navies of countries from Europe, I mean countries like Portugal, as a matter of fact, even the Chinese Navy took part in a naval exercise around the Gulf of Guinea. And, you know, basically all the countries now around that Gulf of Guinea took part in the exercise. I think the Navy actually carried out 2 of that exercise last year, all aimed at preventing fighting sea piracy now, and to equip the navies of these countries now to further fight piracy in the region. And then the Nigerian Navy has actually launched several operations in around that area. I know of 3 operations that the Nigerian Navy launched and has deployed more warships to the Gulf of Guinea. I know, for instance, that NIMASA has been able to acquire satellite surveillance system, and it now has the capacity to see almost every ship on Nigerian waters. So it's one of the reasons why NIMASA, for instance, continues to argue with this report from IMB, and that it's actually not reflective. But the fact is that piracy is still a problem. The Navy has said that, and that what is needed is, well, that better cooperation is still needed among the various countries of the Gulf of Guinea, and that apart from that, you need to have stiffer laws now, you know, governing piracy in the region. Because as we speak today, as a matter of fact, some people are suggesting, even NIMASA is also suggesting that pirates should be, you know, should get the death penalty. So it's something that is being worked on, and but you know, it's not something that Nigeria can do alone.
Right. So according to local analysts, though, to what extent, because it seems there's a bit of a dispute around the data here, to what extent the cases of maritime piracy underreported, and to what extent does the country's oil sector drive incidents of piracy?
The irony of that is that what NIMASA, according to NIMASA, what NIMASA is saying is that sometimes some of these incidents are overreported and they are taken out of context now. There are some incidents, for instance, that NIMASA says that you know, they do not pose any threat at all, should not even require mention at all, but that, you know, they are reported as serious incidents by the International Maritime Bureau. So instead of, you know, cases getting underreported, NIMASA, in its own wisdom, thinks, you know, there's some sort of overreporting, if you like, and that incident that should not ordinarily require reporting at all, that should not, you know, that people should not raise the red flag over. They get reported and they get added to the country's incident report. And then NIMASA says, well, that is doing some kind of reputational damage to the country, and it's actually fighting that. But In terms of how it's affecting the oil industry, well, everybody knows that petrol piracy is now becoming the in thing, and that a lot of oil gets stolen, to say the truth. But then the Nigerian Navy says it has, to some extent, been able to bring that under control, but of course not completely eliminate the problem.
All right, then, speaking of not eliminating the problem, oil output in the Niger Delta, that continues to be an ongoing problem. Shell reporting that oil losses in its operations over there were up 50% in 2017. Did the situation change last year, or did it get worse?
Well, I think it changed last year. 2017, if you remember, we had attacks from militant groups in the especially Niger Delta Avengers. If you still remember, 2017, the activities were actually at the top, 2016, 2017. But by towards the end of 2017, the Nigerian government was able to bring the situation under some form of control, at least reach some kind of agreement now with the militants, and, you know, to some extent acceded to some of their demands. And that's why, you know, there's been quiet in the Niger Delta. For instance, all through 2018, there was quiet in the region, and that's the reason Nigeria's oil production output was able to rise to as high as 1.95 million barrels per day. So there's still quiet in the region, but going into the elections, we don't know what will happen. We've had a couple of groups now come up threatening to resume attacks on oil facilities in the region, but then hopefully the government will be able to deal with that, you know, keep the place calm, and to ensure that you know, things don't go back to the situation that they were in 2000 and early 2016 and 2017. So there's calm now. There's calm in that region. 2018 was good, and the expectation is that, well, maybe 2018 would be better.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the elections, because are we any closer to debating and passing the budget for 2019, or is the market generally resigned to that being attended to well after the February 16th elections have been run and concluded and there's a new president in place?
Honestly, Ramah, the way I say it, I think it would have to be after the presidential election, because, I mean, just look at it. There isn't much time. The election is just some slightly over 30 days, maybe 35, 36 days to the election. I'm talking about the presidential election now. The politicians are really busy. Members of parliament are really busy campaigning, because some of them are actually running to come back. And so everyone is busy at the moment. It's difficult to see these lawmakers, you know, take a break from the campaigns, come back, sit down, and then pass the budget, especially when you consider the fact that the processes involved in passing the budget quite lengthy. Committees will have to be set up and all of that. So it's looking like it's going to be after the elections in February, when a new president, of course, would have been sworn in. That's the way it's looking. I do not see any chance at all that these lawmakers would suspend the ongoing political campaigns to come sit down and discuss the budget. Ramah?
All right, then. So we're still in limbo for the time being. Thank you for the update. That's Tejiban was there live from Lagos. All right, then, company news. Let's actually start where we left off in Nigeria. MTN subsidiary in that country has deployed corporate wide area network services to 139 locations where the country's National Petroleum Corporation does operate. This deal is part of the telco's efforts to improve business operations and support GDP growth in Africa's largest economy. Nigeria is the biggest single market for the JSE-listed telecommunications firm. Elsewhere, East Africa's largest mobile network operator, that's Safaricom, has launched an overdraft facility called Feliza. It will essentially offer its 24 million customers on the M-Pesa platform the opportunity to take out short-term debt if they do run out of cash. The facility is offered in conjunction with KCB and CBA banks on the lending side of the operation. It has a daily charge of about 0.5% of the amount borrowed. The China Road and Bridge Corporation has won a $134 million tender to construct a bridge in the city of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. Now, the contract is part of the West African nation's $700 million Cocody Bay Precinct project. It's expected to bring the number of bridges in the economic capital of the world's largest cocoa producer to about 5. And finally, Toyota has unveiled an automated safety system that uses semi-autonomous tech to help drivers avoid road crashes. The system is called Guardian. It can make decisions on the spot pretty much to avoid collisions. The tech is expected to hit the roads early in the next decade. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. After a wave of consolidation in Ghana, we'll be looking at the status of its banking sector. And Uganda considers charging private hospitals for blood transfusions. All that and more is in the pipeline.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, the UK's government suffered yet another setback in the House of Commons on Wednesday. Lawmakers over there voted to force the Prime Minister, Theresa May, to announce within 3 sitting days what steps will be taken if the Brexit deal she spent the better part of 2 years negotiating is rejected by Parliament next week, Tuesday. However, the UK Prime Minister has assured Parliament it will have a much greater role, a much greater say in talks going forward.
The conclusions of the December European Council went further than before in seeking to address the concerns of this House, and they have legal status. I've been in contact with European leaders since then about MPs' concerns. These discussions have shown that further clarification on the backstop is possible, and those talks will continue over the next few days. We've also been looking at how Parliament can take a greater role as we take these negotiations on to the next stage. And so I can tell the House that in the event that our future relationship or alternative arrangements are not ready by the end of 2020, Parliament will have a vote on whether to seek to extend the implementation period or bring the backstop into effect.
the British Prime Minister earlier today. So let's get you the latest on this developing story from CGTN's Richard Bestick. He joins us now live from London. So Richard, let's put this into context. The government has suffered 2 defeats in the House of Commons back-to-back, including this one in the House of Commons in the afternoon. That cuts the time available for the government to bring a plan B to the House. What's the import of these votes, and where does this leave the Brexit process?
Absolutely right, Ramah. Both these defeats aimed at reining in the government's options on running down the Brexit clock. In other words, taking the Brexit debate in Parliament to the point where MPs are left with the stark option of Theresa May's deal or the greatly anticipated economic chaos of no deal. But there's a wider significance here as well, as you were pointing out. Theresa May, if she needed it, has been given a sharp reminder of the knife-edge vulnerability of her government. 2 defeats within 24 hours. It really doesn't bode well for the vote on her deal next Tuesday, because little appears to have shifted since last December, when she was forced to pull a parliamentary vote. If anything, Ramah, views appear to have become even more entrenched. And now, following today's defeat, should she lose following the latest parliamentary, the Prime Minister will need to bring her Plan B before the House within 3 days, not as had been anticipated, 3 weeks.
Indeed. So the DUP allies from Northern Ireland, they say they will not back this deal that Mrs May has negotiated if it includes the backstop element in it. Why are they opposed to it, and what is the alternative that they're putting forward?
They're not putting an alternative forward, they're just saying they won't accept it. The Democratic Unionists from Northern Ireland have about 10 MPs, and they maintain that the deal Theresa May's agreed with the European Union risks the province being locked into the EU while the rest of the UK is outside it. It's all linked to the border between the north, still under British rule, and the independent republic to the south. The DUP says it would never accept Northern Ireland being treated in any way differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. They regard that as the slippery slope to a reunited Ireland. The government in London has offered all sorts of promises to the DUP, including today a significant say in proposed new EU rules to the so-called backstop. The DUP is unmoved and will be one of the parties voting against May's deal next Tuesday, along with over 100 backbench members of Parliament from May's own party and, of course, opposition parties. All that very likely, Ramah, adds up to defeat for May's deal.
Indeed. One last question for you, Richard. The government, as things stand now, needs about 318 votes in order to get this deal essentially through the House of Commons. But there's been no change in position at all from Brussels. And as you've pointed out, the opposition just seems to have gotten a lot more entrenched. Is it fair at this point to say that this deal is basically dead on arrival?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say May's deal is dead in the water. Unless, and this is politics after all, something truly dramatic happens in the next few days. Nobody's holding their breath on that one. The talk now instead is turning to what might happen after May's anticipated epic fail and Article 50. Remember that one, Ramah? It was Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which the Prime Minister triggered just under 2 years ago, which set the clock ticking on Britain leaving the EU. Now, just 79 days away at the end of March. The talk is of stopping the clock. Brussels would probably play ball on that, but there are so many questions as to what would happen then. A vote of no confidence in the government, Theresa May's government falling, a general election, or even putting the deal to the people with a second referendum. So good they did it twice. Currently, Ramah, nothing can be ruled out.
Indeed. We'll see how this plays out in the economy of 2.8 trillion or so of output. Thank you for that. That's Richard Bestick there live in London. Now, let's go back to West Africa, shall we? Ghana, to be specific. The central bank's reforms of the banking sector there has led to quite a bit of downsizing in the country's banking sector. It's gone from having 36 banks to just 23. This reduction comes in the wake of serious financial distress in the banking space, with some industry players engaging in bad or frankly non-existent corporate governance while accumulating a large portfolio of non-performing loans at the same time. As CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra, the government believes that these reforms will leave the banking sector in a much healthier position.
Ghana's central bank began ringing in changes to the banking sector in 2017 with the announcement of a new minimum capital requirement of $83 million. The GN Bank is among the indigenous lenders that could not meet the new rules and as a result has been reclassified as a savings and loans company.
BOG believes this is the best way to go. GN Bank has fully complied. We are here as a savings and loan. We will continue to ensure financial inclusion and go where people don't go.
GN says the change won't affect its customers.
So essentially, the major change that's going to happen is we won't be able to do the forex account and then the clearing. However, due to our clientele base, it's not going to affect us. About over 1.2 million customers of GN Bank do not do forex.
There are concerns about a potential loss of confidence in local banks. Only 16 out of the 36 lenders in the country met the central bank's recapitalization. Some have had their licenses revoked and merged to form the newly established Consolidated Bank by the central bank. 9 Ghanaian banks have collapsed since the Bank of Ghana started its reforms of the sector 2 years ago. GN Bank now has 6 months to transition into a savings and loans company. It could have a tough task ahead, recapturing the savings and loans market in Ghana.
If people choose to do a panic withdrawal or rundowns, then that's what your situation is going to be. Very, very tough. I hope they would strategize very well and also look at their branch network.
But the biggest worry for now is that it may have a knock-on effect on the Ghanaian economy.
Credit to the private sector will possibly not grow. So we don't expect, and if the credit to the private sector is not growing, you don't expect the economy to expand. You don't expect people to be employed.
The government is injecting over $400 million in 6 solvent indigenous banks, which are undercapitalized, to meet the $83 million minimum requirement as part of efforts to maintain stability. The move is expected to protect jobs and ensure strategic Ghanaian interests in the banking sector. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Bit of data coming your way now. South Africa's seasonally adjusted ABSA PMI for manufacturing, that went up in December. Now, the rise is supported by an improvement in business activity and an increase in new orders too. Now, the index gauges manufacturing activity in Africa's most industrialized economy, and it rose into expansion territory at a reading of 50.7 in December. It was at 49.5, basically in contraction territory in the month before that. The South African economy is staging a gradual, if fragile, recovery after falling into a recession last year. Stronger manufacturing growth in the third quarter was one of the main reasons why it got out of that recession. Next door in Zimbabwe, farmers are urging authorities to undertake cloud seeding in order to ease the early drought season that's ravaging the Southern African nation. The 4-week dry spell has caused some farmers to delay planting altogether. For decades, Zimbabwean authorities have seeded clouds with silver iodide in order to thicken cloud cover and increase the odds of rain. For years, the Southern African state has endured occasional food shortages, especially after the government implemented an often violent program that seized most of the white-owned land. Claims that private hospitals are selling said blood transfusions to patients, even though the hospitals get that blood for free from public facilities. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria with this report from Kampala.
Screening blood for transfusion. Uganda's blood bank prepares more than 350,000 units of blood every year, and health officials say this all comes with a cost.
Every unit of blood we transfuse, government pays $40 to process that blood. So we are saying instead of government paying for that processing, Why can't private facilities also contribute to that $40 of processing this blood?
The blood bank in Uganda carries out donation drives where people willingly donate blood, and both private and government hospitals access blood from the bank without a charge. But now the government is concerned that private facilities are selling blood to patients. It's a claim private hospitals deny.
But it's possible they are charging the service fee for the transfusion. You know, the labor for the nurse to monitor, to set up the unit and so on and so forth. Probably that's what they are charging for, maybe under an item called blood transfusion. Otherwise, blood is totally free.
Some donors are now threatening to pull out.
Of course I won't donate. If they continue selling blood, I'm not going to donate, because when I'm donating, I'll have to be paid.
The Uganda National Transfusion Services needs more than $10 million every year to run the bank. But this financial year, it just has $4 million to work with. The proposal to charge private hospitals for blood could help close that gap, but private hospitals say that would be unfair.
This money, which is centralized at the blood transfusion services, is collected from taxes from from the national coffers, to which these hospitals are contributing greatly. What I suppose you're asking is direct contribution now, again, which I think will make them charge.
But the Ministry of Health says more money needs to come from somewhere. A policy of having to share costs of processing blood is yet to be developed, but the Ministry of Health hopes if it's passed into law, it will help improve stocks at the blood bank. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
It's time for a short break on Global Business Africa. There's plenty more content coming up, including this. Now that trade talks between China and the US have concluded, what exactly was agreed to? And Japan plans to charge you for leaving the country. We'll tell you why when we come back.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. The World Bank has warned that a full-blown trade war between China and the US could somehow throw the world economy into a global recession. The lead author of the World Bank's Global Economic Prospects Report told CGTN's Richard Bestick in London that the real fear is an escalation of tariff disputes between the world's top two economies.
The worry is that these are the two largest economies in the world where the tensions are happening. The US, one little scenario that we look at. What would happen if growth slowed in both of them by 1 percentage point in the second half of 2019? That would slow global growth by somewhere between 3/4 and 1 percentage point in 2019 and 2020, 2 years of it.
Could it trigger a world recession?
So for now, we don't see a world recession or recession in any of the major economies. Any model that exists that tries to estimate the probability of a recession, for example in the US, will give you a low probability of recession, simply because policy stimulus is still heavy. Growth, especially in the US, is still lifted, strengthened by fiscal stimulus. Our worry is the what-if scenario. What if, God forbid, this low probability scenario actually materialized and there was a US recession? That's something that would usually come with a global recession. In 60% of the cases, a US recession has come with a global recession. And those global recessions are painful for emerging markets and developing economies.
You say low probability. What are the odds?
I mean, currently it really depends on the model that puts it on. Usually the odds are below 15%, but it really depends on the model. It's better to compare it against what the model usually says 12 months before a recession hits. So the New York Fed model, for example, currently puts it at half the probability. That usually happens 12 months before a recession.
What impact could a hard, disruptive Brexit have on the UK economy and on the EU, the European Union economy?
So Brexit to us is a clear downside risk to UK growth, but also to euro area growth. There are a lot of emerging markets and developing economies that rely very heavily on trade with the euro area. Those are in Northern Africa, those are especially in Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Anything that derails growth in the euro area will affect growth in these countries as well.
One final question. Surprise resignations at the World Bank, but presumably business goes on at headquarters as usual, does it?
So our role is to monitor the global economy. And we will continue to do that because we really see mounting risks in the global economy to the health of the economies of our client countries, emerging markets and developing economies. And we will continue to monitor them.
All right then, so let's bring that story to what's happening at the moment. China and the United States, they've wrapped up their much anticipated first round of talks after the truce arrived at in early December to try and deal with those trade disputes. Jim Spellman is in Washington right now with more analysis on this. So, Jim, these talks lasted a day longer than initially planned. Do you know any details of the outcome so far?
Well, Ramah, both sides are being fairly tight-lipped about the talks, but here's what we know at this point. In a statement, the U.S. side says discussion centers on what it calls, quote, fairness, reciprocity, and balance in the trade relationship between the world's two largest economies. The U.S. Trade Representative says the negotiations also focused on plans for China to buy more U.S. agricultural products, energy, likely in the form of liquefied natural gas, plus manufactured goods and other products and services. However, no details have yet emerged, and we don't know if concrete commitments were made by either side. The White House spokesperson, Sarah Sanders, told the Fox Business Network the U.S. side is optimistic after this last round of talks and says the two sides are moving towards a deal, but she adds that no timing has been agreed to at this point. A spokesman for China's foreign ministry says the extended talks show both sides are taking the discussion seriously. We expect a further readout from the Chinese side sometime soon, Ramah.
Right then, so are these two sides any closer though to the key issues at the heart of this dispute? IP violations for one, or US demands for an end to taxpayer-funded subsidies for state-owned entities in China?
These are very tricky issues, and the U.S. statement doesn't go into any detail on this, but does say that the two sides discussed verification and enforcement of any agreement dealing with issues like intellectual property protections. The trade deficit fairly easy to accurately measure, but some of these proposed structural changes the U.S. is pushing for are more difficult to measure. So the Trump administration wants clear mechanisms in place to monitor these aspects of the trade relationship. these proposed structural changes have always been far more difficult to address than the trade deficit. Now, whether a deal can be struck may come down to whether President Trump is more swayed by the hardline protectionists in his inner circle or whether moderates can convince the president that a deal is needed to reassure markets, shore up the U.S. economy as the White House begins to look ahead to President Trump's re-election bid, Ramah.
Indeed. One last question for you, Jim. European and American indices broadly higher, especially at the conclusion of these talks. But as you've pointed out, there's no deal on the table just yet, especially on the key issues. So in that sense, aren't markets celebrating a bit too early here? Why are investors optimistic?
That could be, but I think there's a sense that after months of bad news and uncertainty on the trade front, that investors seem encouraged by that additional third day added on to these negotiations. It's created optimism that a deal will be struck before the tariff truce agreed to by President Trump and President Xi ends on March 1st. Of course, there are many other issues at play here, including ongoing concerns about what moves the Fed will make this year, and the ongoing U.S. government shutdown with no end in sight has also rattled investors to a degree. But the White House certainly hopes that a trade deal with China, along with strong U.S. economic fundamentals, will send the markets back to those record levels we saw last year. The Chinese side notes that if the negotiations have positive results, that will be good for both sides, and investors seem to feel it'll be good for them as well, Ramah.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. That's Jim Spellman there live in Washington, D.C. Now, just to give our viewers a sense of the numbers that we're talking about as far as the market frothiness, if you will, is concerned. The S&P 500, that's essentially up by about 0.7% at the moment. And, of course, the NASDAQ composite as well, also up by 1.1%. But as you heard in that conversation, no deal on the table just yet. Simply an agreement to keep talking. Now, let's move on. Japan has just joined a list of countries, growing countries, we should point out, that levy a tax on all persons leaving the country. Think of it as a departure tax. It's estimated to be about $10 or so, and the government says it will be used to improve the country's tourist services. Tokyo expects to collect about $460 million from this new tax in the course of the year. Here's Yuan with more.
The departure tax will have to be paid by both foreign and Japanese travelers, anyone over 2 years old, including anyone in transit with a stay of over 24 hours. Government officials say income from the tax will amount to some 6 billion yen between January and March 2019, and that the money will be spent on projects including facial recognition system at customs and setting up more multilingual tourist information machines. The Japan Tourism Agency says the country received more than 30 million tourists in 2018, and the government is aiming to see that figure reach 40 million by 2020, the year when Tokyo is to hold the Summer Olympics. Japan is now the second most favored destination for Chinese tourists, and neither potential tourists nor travel agencies expect the tax to have a dampening effect on the travel.
I don't think it will stop me from going there. Compared to the visa fee, it's very minimal.
It won't affect me much because it's quite low. And I heard that you don't need to submit asset verification papers to get a Japanese visa, so that's more convenient.
The Japan Tourism Agency says the average spending of a Chinese tourist is around 13,000 yuan per tour, so the tax is relatively low compared to their spending. According to our latest booking data, as of January 4th, the number of Chinese tourists going to Japan during the Spring Festival is up over 40% compared to the same period in 2018.
Japanese authorities originally hadn't been planning to levy the departure tax until this April, but moved up the date to take advantage of the huge tourist base during the Chinese Spring Festival, according to the Japanese finance news agency Nikkei. The country is generally raising its taxes, however. Japan raised the tobacco tax by 3 yen per cigarette last October, and reportedly is considering raising consumption taxes by 2% to a total of 10%. The aim is to offset increased social security and medical expenses stemming from the country's aging population. The Bank of Japan estimates that projected increases in tax revenues will contribute an additional 5.6 trillion yen to the government budget this year.
日本整体经济还算不错，那么政府可能也有这方面的考虑。
Japan's economic development is quite stable now, which allows the government to levy more taxes. That, in return, will give the government more income, which hopefully will form a benign circle.
应该也是一个比较积极的信号。
Japan is not the first popular tourist destination to start charging extra money from travelers. Other popular destinations such as Paris, London, Rome, and Amsterdam are also charging so-called tourism taxes. New Zealand announced last year that it will start charging a tourism tax of between 25 and 35 New Zealand dollars, or around 150 RMB, as early as the middle of this year. Yuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, the world's largest personal tech show, CES, always takes place in January. It's currently underway in Las Vegas. This grand stage is giving Chinese tech firms a platform to showcase their tech to a global audience. CGTN's Mark New was there, and he filed this report for What's Hot Tonight.
I'm here at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. This is the famous show floor where more than 4,400 companies from around the world are exhibiting their products. 13 to 14% of the footprint here, Chinese companies. One of those making waves is the company Royal, which actually in October made waves by releasing the world's first flexible phone. It actually has 1, 2, and 3 screens. As crowds marvel at the Flex Pi for the first time, the company is showing off its bendable screens in phones, apparel, and much more. Tell me what's new here.
Yes. So what we're seeing here is a flexible keyboard. That's literally, a full-size keyboard that is made on top of a thin film, and you can actually just retract it with an electronic motor, and you can. It's really thin, huh? How thin? Yes. It's under 50 micron. So that's very, very thin. As you can see here, I'm typing. So CES. That's it.
At CES, other Chinese startups are proving that AI can be embedded in practically anything with wheels. For example, the startup FordX from Beijing has produced this Ovis smart suitcase. All I have to do is hold it for 3 seconds. The camera uses computer vision to recognize me, and artificial intelligence can follow me wherever I go. Try to shake it, still knows where I am.
Oh look, his suitcase is following him.
In addition to the self-following suitcase, FordX also has a service robot and a lawnmower robot, all driven by AI.
We bring the AI brain, the perception, the algorithm, and the controlling together. It can enable different wheeled robots to see the world, understand the space, understand the people.
Chinese company iFlyTech is making a splash at CES by using AI to help machines and devices learn, listen, and translate. And I'm here with Dr. Li Chuangong, who is the Vice President of iFlyTech. This is the iFlyTech Translator 2.0. I'm going to ask him some questions. This uses artificial intelligence offline to translate. What have you been doing so far?
到目前为止你在做什么？
我正在参加美国消费电子展。
I am attending the American Consumer Electronics Show.
Do you think this device will revolutionize communication?
你认为这个装置会彻底改变通讯吗？
当然是的，人工智能正在改变世界。
Artificial intelligence, of course, is changing the world.
Just a few of the Chinese tech companies here at the Consumer Electronics Show, transforming the way we communicate and work on the go. I'll be here all week for more coverage at CES. Mark New, CGTN, Las Vegas.
You can bet we're looking forward to a lot more of that coverage. Let's make a quick run through commodity prices now for you, shall we? All prices, there we go. They're broadly in recovery at the moment, vaulting over $60 a barrel at 14:07 GMT. The UAE's energy minister points out that with cuts of 1.2 million barrels a day being implemented, he sees that as more than sufficient to rebalance the market by the end of the first half of the year. In December, OPEC cut output by about 630,000 barrels a day. Platts data suggests you need to take out another 950, maybe a million more in order to balance that out by the end of the month in order to hit that OPEC target. The 800-pound buffalo in the room, though, American output, especially the EIA forecasting that is going to rise to 12 million barrels of crude a day this year. Here's what's coming up next. We'll introduce you to a South African video game that's making waves across the world. Gamers, this is for you.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. A video game called Semblance was first developed in South Africa by two innovators originally as just a university project. Now, though, it's being played by tens of thousands of gamers in countries as far afield as China, Korea, Russia, America, and even Brazil. CGTN's Terry Wangare walks us through how this title came to be.
The game features great design, music, and unique mental challenges. But unlike most popular games, this one was not developed in any of the big international studios. It was created in Africa. Shukya Kimani and Ben Myers met while they were both studying game development. They developed a university project called Semblance, and on the advice of their lecturer, they decided to take it further and designed one of the most popular indie video games to come out of South Africa.
So it's something where the technology that I was building and Ben's designs put together start to create something new and fresh. And then we were always trying to do things that were differently. So even the music that was being done in South Africa, in Cape Town, we were always pushing the boundaries.
The developers didn't think their first offering would be the one to help them get a piece of the global gaming industry. The industry is estimated at over $100 billion, which is more than the broadcast rights for many major sports.
Can't reveal sales numbers because of all these NDAs storefronts have, but it's been played by tens of thousands of people from since when we started developing it to now when it's purchasable. It's played by people all over the world.
The duo now run a company and studio called Nyamakop. They have traveled all over the world to show Semblance at prestigious gaming events like PAX East, Gamescom, E3 and EGX.
I think I like the fact that these are South Africans that are making these games, and it's not big name brands. It's actual guys that are starting out in the industry, and it's cool.
But it's good. It stimulates your brain.
So
that's cool.
You're playing games as well as thinking at the same time.
it's not like you're a couch potato, you're actually thinking.
Yeah.
Because you always say like, oh, you sit and play games and you're like, but I didn't, but you're not.
The gaming industry in South Africa made around $71 million in 2016, up from $2 million in 2014. Revenues hit $118 million last year, and international publishers and investors have taken notice. Semblance launched for purchase in July 2018 and is now available on PC, Mac and Nintendo Switch. Nyamakop was invited to Africa Games Week, another industry event held in Cape Town, to showcase Semblance and impart some of their knowledge to young game developers.
So it's good to see that there's a great interest into people trying to find out what's happening in Africa in video games, because we're making it hot. We're making it hot.
What I spoke about was just like hustle, pretty much. Like hustle as this idea is like if you were in Africa, and so I was just teaching about how you can like overcome the disadvantages we have being in South Africa making games and use it to your advantage.
Nyamakop's founders say their next move is to join the groundswell of African digital storytellers that are using games to explore the continent's folklore.
There's an opportunity now for African creatives, African developers to start sharing games and stories that the world hasn't seen before. And I think that's one of the key sort of selling points that we can really offer sort of the international markets.
According to research firm Newzoo, South Africa ranked third last year in gaming industry revenues on the continent. Second was Nigeria at $172 million, and Egypt was first at $193 million. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
That game title does remind me of a certain sleeper